All right, let's get into it. For years, everyone's been asking the same question. What really happened to JFK?
Right. What are they not telling us?
Yeah, exactly. What's been hidden all this time? And today, we're diving deep, straight into some brand new CIA documents, dispatches, contact reports. The real deal.
Oh, wow. Straight from the source.
Yeah. And these files, well, they give us a peek behind the curtain. A look at what the government might have wanted to keep under wraps about the assassination.
This is huge. I mean, this is like a direct line to what was going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So for you listening, think of this as your deep dive, your chance to uncover what they didn't want you to know.
I love it.
So today we're focusing on three major questions. First, was Oswald connected to intelligence agencies, deeper than we ever knew?
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Second, what was going on with Cuba and those anti-Castro operations? What was the CIA really up to?
I mean, that's always been a huge question mark.
And finally, all this surveillance they were doing.
Yeah.
What did they know? And when did they know it?
Wow. Okay, yeah, let's get into it.
So, first things first. These aren't just some after-the-fact reports. This is real-time communication within the CIA during one of the most pivotal moments in history.
So we're seeing their immediate concerns, their priorities, what they were really focused on.
Precisely. And it gets even more interesting when we start talking about Oswald. We have a dispatch dated October 13th, 1967. Now, this is years after the assassination, right?
Okay, so they're still digging into this, even years later.
Exactly. It details contact reports about meetings with someone codenamed AMCLOCK1.
AMCLOCK1. All right, who's this guy?
That's the million-dollar question. Now, these meetings happened in September of '67 with a guy named Peter J. DeGuerno. And get this, the reports generated from these meetings have their own designations, NYM 2233 and NYM 2234.
They're really keeping tabs on this.
Right. But here's the kicker. AMCLOCK1 is instructed to call a JMWAVE operational number as soon as he gets to New York.
Hold on, JMWAVE? That was the CIA's main hub for Cuban operations, right? Down in Miami.
Exactly. So what's someone meeting about Oswald doing with instructions to contact that specific station?
Yeah, that's suspicious. Like, really suspicious. It's got to be connected to Cuba somehow, right?
It's not looking good for the whole lone gunman theory, is it?
Mm-hmm.
And it gets even wilder. These reports mention that back in '66, AMCLOCK1 tried to meet with someone using Oswald's alias, HT-based.
No way! They're trying to meet with someone pretending to be Oswald.
Not even pretending. They're trying to meet with someone who is or was connected to Oswald in some way.
Yeah.
And get this, they tried 7 times.
7.
Wow, they were persistent. What were they so desperate to find out? I mean, what could this HT-based person know that was so important years after Oswald's dead?
Right, it's like they were trying to understand Oswald's past, or maybe even find someone who worked with him. It definitely makes you think about the whole lone gunman thing again.
Yeah, lone gunman, my foot. This is sounding more and more like a cover-up every minute. And the plot thickens. The plan for these meetings in '67 was to take pictures of AMCLOCK1 with DeGuerno. And they even wanted DeGuerno to hand over a contact folder.
A contact folder? That sounds serious.
Right. But despite all this planning, they couldn't manage to meet face-to-face.
Huh. Like they were being watched or something.
It's possible. Maybe someone was onto them and they had to abort. Or maybe they were just trying to look like they were trying to meet, without actually doing it.
Okay, yeah, to throw people off their scent. This is some real cloak and dagger stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And there's more. AMCLOCK1 was also manning a phone at a place called the Beekman site. He even tried calling DeGuerno there.
Wait, so there were multiple ways to contact him?
Yeah. The instructions were to call either the JMWAVE number or this Beekman place. You'd think with all those options they could have connected.
You would think. So what went wrong? Was someone compromised? Or were they being watched too closely to meet?
Well, the documents do mention surveillance. They say the building where AMCLOCK1 was staying was being watched.
Oh, so they knew. Someone knew.
Right. And it seems AMCLOCK1 was aware of it too, because he left the building, then came back after exchanging signals with DeGuerno.
Oh, wow. So they're actively trying to avoid being seen together. This is getting more and more intriguing.
It is. And the cherry on top, ALCK1 tells the agent he has no way to contact him and says he'll see him later. It's like a bad spy movie.
I know, right? You can't make this stuff up. So what does all this tell us about Oswald? About what the government was hiding?
I mean, it sure seems like they were trying really hard to connect with someone who knew Oswald, someone with ties to the CIA's Cuban operations, years after Oswald was dead. It makes you think that maybe just maybe there's a lot more to this whole story than we've been told.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think we're just scratching the surface here. And speaking of Cuba, let's dive into that a little more. We have another dispatch, this one from May 21st, 1963, just months before the assassination.
Okay, so we're moving back in time now.
Right. And this one is from Mexico City, which, as you know, was a hotbed of intelligence activity back then, especially when it came to Cuba.
And this is right around the time that Oswald was down there, right?
Exactly. So any information from that time period, especially about people who might have crossed paths with Oswald, is potentially really important.
This dispatch talks about contacts made by someone codenamed L9 in early May of '63. His reports cover a bunch of people involved with Cuba in some way, and one name really pops out: Sylvia Duran.
Sylvia Duran, ring a bell.
She was a Cuban employee at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. And guess what? She was giving L9 information about visa applications and embassy personnel. The reports even say she was cooperative.
Hold on, so she's working at the Cuban embassy, but she's giving intel to the CIA. And she met with Oswald, right?
She did. It makes you wonder if their meeting was as random as it seemed. Was she reporting on him? Was she trying to influence him?
Oh, man, that's a whole other layer of intrigue. And it makes you question what the government really knew about her involvement.
Right. It gets more complicated, too. The dispatch mentions reports on Francisco Rodriguez Brito and Antonio Darce, both heading back to Cuba. And there are details about Raul Roa's contacts and activities, plus a bunch of visa requests for people wanting to go to Cuba.
So they're watching everyone coming and going.
It's like they were obsessed with Cuba, tracking every move, every connection.
Which makes sense, I guess, given the political climate back then. But it also makes you wonder, did they miss something important while they were so focused on Cuba?
It's a good question. Now, let's fast forward a bit. We have a dispatch from March 19th, 1964, about the recruitment of AMCUTLER. He was a U.S. journalist with access to anti-Castro Cubans in Miami.
So now they're not just focused on Cuba itself, but also on the Cuban exiles here in the U.S.
Yeah, it seems they were really worried about what the exiles were up to. Remember, this was a powerful group, and they weren't always on the same page as the U.S. government.
Recruiting a journalist within that community would have been a goldmine of intel. They could find out what they're planning, who they were connected to, the whole 9 yards.
The dispatch mentioned something called Identity 3 restrictions. Apparently, that was to prevent conflict with JMWAVE's security.
JMWAVE again! It's like they were trying to keep everything compartmentalized.
Yeah, like they didn't want different parts of the CIA knowing what the other parts were doing. It makes you wonder what they were so afraid of leaking.
I mean, it's not like they were known for being super transparent.
True.
Yeah.
And then there's this detail about AMCUTLER getting operational support, including contacts with Andrew and Orlando Campos. They were big names in the anti-Castro movement.
So they're actively connecting him with key players.
Yeah. And get this, they also mentioned using media outlets for propaganda, places like the Miami News and Latin American Editor.
Propaganda, that's pretty messed up.
It is. They were trying to control the narrative, shape how people saw Cuba in the assassination.
So it's not just about what they knew, it's about what they were putting out there, trying to control what the public believed.
Exactly. So when you look at all these connections, both pro and anti-Castro, what does that tell us about what was really happening back then?
It tells me it was a whole lot messier than the official story. We've got all these competing interests, hidden agendas. Who knows who was pulling the strings?
Right. And it makes you wonder if someone connected to Cuba, whether it was the government or the exiles, might have played a role in the assassination, a role we may never know about.
Yeah, the whole thing was like a powder keg waiting to explode, and it seems like the CIA was right in the middle of it.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about surveillance. We have one more dispatch, dated December 9th, 1963, just weeks after the assassination.
Wow, so they're scrambling for information right after it happens.
This one's about the debriefing of someone called AMFUNA-14 down in Miami.
I guess they wanted to talk to anyone who might have known something.
And AMFUNA-14 had connections within the Cuban community, so they were definitely interested in what she had to say.
Makes sense. They were probably looking for any hints of Cuban involvement.
The dispatch says her apartment was under surveillance, and she was questioned by something called the DSE. That's probably some kind of domestic security agency.
Wow, they were really taking this seriously. They must have been really worried about a conspiracy.
Yeah, and the fact that they were focusing on people with Cuban ties so soon after the assassination, it's telling.
Like they had tunnel vision. Maybe they missed something important because they were so focused on Cuba.
It's a possibility. Now, during the debriefing, AMFUNA-14 gave them info about a couple of guys, Carlos and El Negro. They were involved in the Cuban exile scene.
So they're digging into everyone connected to these guys.
Yeah. They were also interested in AMCUTLER II and Amafina 14's relationship with him. The dispatch even mentions phone calls, meetings, the whole works.
They were keeping tabs on every little detail. What were they hoping to find?
I think they were looking for anyone who might have known about the assassination beforehand, or anyone who might have been involved.
But if they were so focused on the Cuban connection, they might have missed other leads. It's like they were trying to fit everything into a neat little box.
And maybe that box wasn't the right one. So here we are at the end of our deep dive, and what have we learned?
A lot, and not enough.
Right. We've seen all these attempts to contact people connected to Oswald, people with potential ties to the CIA's Cuban operations.
And we've seen the CIA's deep involvement in the whole Cuban situation, both with the government and the exiles.
And let's not forget the intense surveillance, the focus on Cuban connections in the immediate aftermath of the assassination.
It all paints a very different picture than the official story. A much more complicated, much more shadowy picture.
And for you listening, think about this. What else is hidden in these archives? What other pieces of the puzzle are still waiting to be found?
What does it all mean? Was Oswald really a lone gunman? Or was there something much bigger going on?
These are the questions we're left with. Questions that may never be fully answered.
But we have to keep asking. We have to keep digging. The truth is out there somewhere.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.